It's taking a while. You need to close some windows, I think.
Yeah, that seems to be the problem for most of us. So,
Yeah,
bro,
I've got way too many windows open here. Hey, YouTube people. Sorry, I have to. I'm closing browser windows so the pod goes a little smooth. All right, let's tweet that out, and then I'll do a fancy intro, and we'll be ready to go. There. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot Podcast here on HawkFanatic.com. It is Thursday, August the 15th, a little before 9:30 a.m. Central Time. As usual, Scott Doctorman, my partner here from I almost said the Gazette. Wow, that was a really lapse of memory. It's been a while.
uh,
When was your last year at the Gazette?
it was about 8 years ago. This week, maybe next week,
Yeah,
something
my
like
mind
that.
just went back to
2016.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. He is from the Athletic. And I was saying that we had a good discussion before we started recording. We should make that like pay, like people have to pay to listen to that part. Maybe we could make some money, but probably not. People aren't that interested. But we'll give them the black and white nuts and bolts stuff on here, not any
yeah.
of the gossipy drama
Uh,
type stuff that we talk about off the air. But I
you know,
wanted to say before we get started, because I don't want to forget this, Scott has an article out today that we've talked about on the podcast that I've been looking forward to reading. Haven't had a chance to read it because I just saw it before we started getting on the Zoom. But an in-depth look on why Iowa's defense is as good as it is annually. Can you give the folks kind of an overview on what they'll read in that, Scott?
yeah, I appreciate that, Rob, and I think it's an interesting breakdown. It's something I've wanted to do, and I sat down with Seth Wallace a few months ago, and we really kind of went through some of the video. We went through some of the looks, and just some of the things about Iowa that makes Iowa different, unique, special on defense. And there's some of it that everybody already knows, and then there's some stuff that maybe you would learn. And I think number one is I've really focused on really two aspects of the defense and how unusual they are in working together, and yet they do. And one is the two gap technique up front. Iowa employs, especially when it comes to their defensive tackles, that they occupy two gaps. So that may be if they're head up on a guard, let's say. That includes the A gap next to the center, and then the other gap, the B gap, which would be next in between the guard and the tackle. And one's a primary, one's a secondary. And their whole goal really is to control the line of scrimmage. It's not necessarily to get tackles for loss. It's not necessarily for pass rush. It's not necessarily for statistics. And there's a lot of times when, last year I would say the Wisconsin game, Y.A. Black may have been the best player on the game. But you look statistically, and I don't know how many tackles he had, but let's say 3. Nobody knows that. But when you take up 2 blockers every single time, and you force the running back to move in a different direction, or the quarterback to move out of the pocket in a different way, you're impacting the game. And it's more about pass disruption rather than pass rush. And then in the running game, it's about displacement. And then the second part, and I think this is what's fascinating, is since they went to cash, they are by far better than they were ever before that. And I mean, I know we're talking, well, Norm Parker back in 2004, but let's kind of separate that because offenses have completely changed over the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But when they went to cash, the level of production and efficiency in every single area, and visually for that matter, has been off the charts. Yet they're still doing that with only occupying fewer gaps than most people do, which is they put 8 in the box. We always hear that term, hey, we're going to stop the run, we're going to put 8 in the box. They never do that. They are 7 in the box. And if you think about it, their 7 in the box includes a defensive back. And yet they're still able to stop the run with great efficiency. And it protects the whole idea. The most important part of this scheme for Iowa is to protect the secondary and eliminate explosive plays. And that's why they have the two high safety shell, where their 2 safeties are always back. Last year, they only gave up 15 explosive plays all years, which is what they consider 25 plus yards. Only 2 on the ground. Shows great tackling, great rallying to the football, and doing all those different things. So when you look at that, it doesn't always mesh. If you're a great run stopping team, a lot of times you're 8 in the box. If you're a great disruptor in the passing game, well, you're getting to the quarterback, through sacks, through penetration. They're not necessarily doing that either. They are incredible when it comes to their fundamentals and their development. It's something that they always talk about, but when you talk to other people who really understand it, I talked to Aaron Taylor for a while, who played at Notre Dame. He was a 2-time All-American, runs basically the chairman of the Joe Moore Award committee. And he could not be more praiseworthy. It's like, an homage to the, you could just see the smiles, and, he was effusive in praise, because the fundamentals are so good, which comes back to teaching, which also comes back to recruiting, because, and I couldn't get into everything that I wanted to really. I don't have a limit, but I have a limit on what I can reach. But it comes back to identifying players in the recruiting process that they think will fit with what they want to do. And that's a mental approach, because defensive linemen have to be unselfish. You can't just say, if I can't get 10 sacks, and I'm not going, that's not going to happen at Iowa. You might get there, but it's not the focus. It's stop the run. It's being physical at the point of attack. It's disruption. But they identify that in the beginning. And then I talked to like Deontay Craig, and I didn't quote YA, but I talked to him too. And a lot of that is at the front end, you're going to get coach tough. Coach Kelvin Bell and Seth and Phil, they're going to be very tough on you. And you've got to understand that from day one. So they're able to take the tough coaching and the criticism, but they're also able to see the development. And it's, like everybody's always said about Kelvin, is he is so real. He tells you in advance this is going to happen. And he said, and what they say is they see the development happening, and that's exactly how he described it in the recruiting process. So it's this holistic look at the Iowa defense. Also, the erasers is what I call them. They're linebackers. And, oh, by the way, since 2017, they've had 3 first-team All-American middle linebackers. And you look, in the secondary, which to me, the numbers there are just off the charts. 6 out of the 13 defensive backs of the year have been Hawkeyes. And none of them had a Power 5 offer to go along with being recruited as a defensive back. The only one who had a Power 5 offer was Desmond King to play running back in Indiana. Micah Hyde, Josh Jackson, Riley Moss, none of them. Even Cooper DeJean, was not recruited to be a Power 5 defensive back. He was recruited to be a quarterback at South Dakota State. So the way that they're able to coach it, and then the geometry of how you align people, and then, the toughness with which you install, and then the mental and physical toughness that you play with, it's really, and then the stability. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is the same defense that you look at in 1999 that you look at today, with a few tweaks, meaning cash is the only tweak. So anyway, that was a long story there of how I described it, but I really think it's a neat look at what they did, and they did a great job of describing it. And in fact, there are times I'm like, man, I left so much on the cutting room floor that I wish I could write part 2,
Yeah. Well, if you're talking about, the success of that unit for the last 25 years, obviously it was a little rough the first few years, but for the most part, it's you've always been able to count on it. And I look forward to reading what you found out about why that is, because it's people have tried. I think people want to or feel like it's so basic that they should be able to beat it. And then I think it's even more frustrating when they can't, because they know how to beat it and they still can't beat it.
Exactly.
I mean, I was basically going to make you methodically go down the field. You talked about 25-yard big plays. They just don't give those up. So if you're impatient, especially young quarterbacks, things like that we see through the years. And then on top of it, you throw in, if they're at Kinnick in the north end zone with we saw it with Penn State a few years ago. I mean, the defense with the crowd at Kinnick Stadium is, we've seen what it's been able to pull off.
Exactly. And that's the biggest problem. I talked to the Purdue center. He's a smart guy. I knew that anyway going in, and he was really descriptive in how he said how difficult it is. And I had to cut some of that, but it was like, he's like, take guys like Y.A. Black and Logan Lee that they had last year. They're big guys. Their hand placement is always perfect. Their fundamentals are always perfect. And you just can't move them. And they know exactly what they want to do every single time, and they're never out of the wrong place, and they're never out of the wrong gap. And yes, it's funny because you would think as a schemer, okay, this is what they're going to do. This is what we're going to do to counter that. And it works if you're patient, if you're good enough, because frankly, your guard and center better be able to block them. Even if they know what they're going to do, you better be able to beat them off the ball all the time, every single play. And you can't do that. They're just that good. And then, what I think happened last year with Iowa, they traditionally, as we know, are amazing when it comes to turnovers and interceptions. Last year didn't happen as much because teams used Iowa against Iowa, which was that offense isn't doing anything. We're not going to make any unnecessary mistakes. We're just going to play our game. And, otherwise, if Iowa was up 10-0 on teams with that defense, 13-0, then 16-0, and then it's like, then they got to feel like they got to pass. And then that's where the mistakes come. They just didn't have to do that. Even the teams like in Illinois and Northwestern, Purdue, that weren't great, but they just couldn't do anything last year because of that. And then I look at, and that was a major reason why. And then the other thing, like Seth kind of described, is like, Norm's philosophy is, everything is rob Peter to pay Paul, and so you have to give up something. You just can't cover everything. So we're going to give up the short pass, but what we're going to do, we're going to rally to the effing football with relentlessness and effort. And so, okay, they throw the swing pass in the flat, they pick up 5 yards. We hit the shit out of them. And at 2nd and 5, we live to fight another down. All right. And then they got to do it again and again and again. And you hit them over and over and over again. It's like, or you figure it out and it's like, okay, now we're going to tweak it. And then it doesn't work. And then, how do you counter it? I mean, the one thing that I think is the most impressive was Purdue under Jeff Brom all those years, that they just kept attacking. And that's hard to do because that's kind of unconventional.
Yeah, and it takes most teams out of their comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
To do what they do with Purdue. It's like, Jeff Brown's like, you're going to let us throw short passes? We'll keep doing it, and then we'll hit you over the top with David Bell.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's
and Anthony Mahogany.
They had the personnel too to take it to Iowa that way, but they, Brom's kind of a poker player, and he's gonna roll it out there. That's just kind of the way he coaches, which it made it for. I'm going to miss that matchup because I thought it was fun, but I'm sure Phil won't miss it.
No, not at all. I mean, you think about it, Rob. I mean, if you're covering it from a chess perspective, it is so fascinating when you have two completely different styles that you in Iowa. I would say the two offenses that I've seen over the years that created the most challenges for Iowa, just from a willingness to play it the way they want to play it, were Northwestern and Purdue.
Yep, I knew you were going with Northwestern because they would drive Norm nuts. Yeah,
because they were smart and patient and willing. They have smart kids.
And quarterback runs.
It'd be 3rd down and 8, and then all of a sudden nobody's open. They've got everybody covered, but they're in deep coverage. And then Dan Persa or Kane Coulter or Mike Kafka or whoever.
Bazinet,
all the quarterbacks from the past, and all of a sudden they would take off and run, and it's like, damn, that was a 9-yard run, and it's just they break your back. And they're not winning big against Iowa, but they're doing the small details to drive you crazy because teams aren't willing to go, we're gonna beat you. We're on the 25-yard line. We're going to go 12 plays in 75 yards. They want to beat you down the field at some point. They want a big play, but they're not willing to, all right, we're going to run the ball, then play action pass, flat pass, move the chains and continue to move the chains and be willing to take those. And then Purdue, because as he said, the other thing with Brom is if something's working, he's not going to go away from it. It's kind of like most OCs will say, okay, we see this, we hit the big pass down the sideline for 35 yards. And we're going to come back to that later on. No, he's like, we're doing it now. We're doing it now again. And that happened in 17 when they went from Manny Rugamba to
was Josh Jackson involved in that?
Josh Jackson was involved too. Matt Hankins had to come in. He was the third one. Jackson eventually had to flip over, and there was somebody else. Oh, it was Ojemudia. So, and you think about it, Hankins is still in the NFL, so is Ojemudia. Jackson's not, surprisingly, but they went through all these cornerbacks because nobody was playing the deep part of it effectively. And he's willing to attack. And then by the time Iowa figured it out, they're down 9 points and they can't catch up. And that's but anyway, that to me, the chess matchups are always fun to analyze. And Brom was really good at that. And now you've got other teams in the league that provide those opportunities.
Lincoln Riley. Let's see what Lincoln Riley comes up with.
Mm-hmm.
So
that'd be a fun game this year. I mean, just because last year too, for that matter. I mean, you got Caleb Williams and Iowa's defense, and then you've got the completely movable force against the team playing hockey with golf shoes.
Oregon's got a pretty good attack too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Some of those teams are going to be, I think, are going to get a wake up call when they come to Kinnick.
Yeah, Washington will.
First up, Washington.
Yeah, welcome to the Big Ten moment. For them. I mean, they got to go back to back. I think Michigan, Iowa. So
that'll be initiation, no doubt about it. That's you'll be settled in after that.
But before the Chiefs were the Chiefs under Patrick Mahomes, it was always like that too. Back in the day, especially when they had like Marty Schottenheimer defenses. I think Marty Ball and Kirk Ball are real similar, and there would always be like an NFC team that was really good that would go to Arrowhead, and all of a sudden it'd be like 34-7, and they just kick the hell out of them. I remember the Rams had that happen after they won the Super Bowl, and and that's the way it is coming to Kinnick too. I mean, we've seen it every Michigan or Ohio State or Penn State comes, and it's like, all right. This is a steel cage match.
Yep. The teams that have been in the league know what they're getting into, but that's what's going to be fun about seeing these Pac-12 teams come in and their first experiences there. I look forward to being on the field shooting photos of that when they're in the north end zone. All right, folks, it's probably a good time to take a break. I know we're not that far into the podcast, but this seems like a good a break point where we can come back and get into what we saw at spring Kids Day practice. Support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Thank you to Systems Unlimited. We're going to hear from a few more sponsors right now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side. Hang tight. And we are back here on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast to let you know that switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights. We switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch, but what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch right here in Iowa City can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call when you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm. is there. Scott, before we hop into football quickly, for those folks that maybe were swept away in the Olympic coverage and lost track of the WNBA, the W is back tonight, Thursday, August 15th, a slate of games. Your favorite player, Caitlin Clark, will be in action tomorrow night, Friday, August the 16th. The Fever play host to Diana Taurasi and the Phoenix Mercury, showing that the WNBA does have a sense of humor when scheduling, because that game will get a lot of attention. And I think they've cooled things off. It looked like when they played the first time, they kind of got over the nonsense. So I think she's going to come back on a mission. Scott, this is the first time she's had a rest in a long time, and she's recharged. And I think the league is going to see a very motivated and very focused Caitlin Clark, and that's not good news for the opposition.
No, it's good news for the league. It's good news for Indiana. It's not going to be good news for the rest of.
And also, the All-Star game next year is in Indiana too. I want to throw that in there.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping it'd be at Kinnick, that they'd have something like that. But no, I can imagine that at some point, Rob, we'll see like a Des Moines WNBA exhibition or something like that. You imagine the Lynx playing the Fever or something there, or Aces if Kate Martin's still there, that'd be great. I agree wholeheartedly with you, because she's had vacations. She's with Mexico. I saw she was in New York City, went to a Yankees game and the other day. But
wasn't that something Aaron Boone talking about how the Yankees were like starstruck by seeing her?
I know, it's crazy. It is. I mean, when they played Ohio State in basketball this year, after their practice, I mean, Ryan Day brought his daughters to meet her. It's just. It's really different. And I think the people, there's still people that are trying to really gen up a bunch of junk on Twitter and stuff. And I think it's bullshit. And, what people need to respect is, it doesn't matter who you're, if people are fans of people, they're going to be fans. And I think in this case, Caitlin having that rest, being able to mentally decompress and not be the focus of attention all that often, except when she goes to Yankees games and stuff. And then conversely, the great players that went over to, the US's JV team, because the varsity won, of course, the All-Star game, with the US JV game that won gold the other day, they're going to, they didn't have a break. They had to go play. They had to go across the world, across the pond, and do all this stuff. So now they're, now they're going to be like, man, we're back into it. And Caitlin's going to be like, okay, I know this game. So, and probably Leah Boston too, for that matter, and Angel Reese. And I do kind of question though, Rob, and this is going to be interesting, is how much momentum can they sustain, because football season's on the way. I mean,
it's good that it's at least now, and it's not like a couple weeks from now. Maybe they can, catch some people here in the next couple weeks, get them back into it, that they can at least get a piece of the pie.
Yeah. But I think if they play in the midweek, and the midweek, I mean like Tuesday through Friday-ish, then I think they're going to be okay. But if you start messing around with Saturday, Sunday, and even Monday, I think you're going to, and Friday could even enter that discussion a little bit. But that's when I think they could have problems with attendance and interest and coverage and stuff. Because Caitlin could hit 40 on a Saturday or Sunday, and it's not going to resonate.
Not if the Colts are playing.
Yeah, the Colts or Iowa, because, I'm sure a good third of our people watching are still Iowa fans. At least.
They head into the second half, Scott. Where are the Fever? They are 11-15, third place in the Eastern Conference, well behind the Liberty and the Sun. Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams have better records than them. They are in 7th, with Angel Reese and the Sky right behind them in 8th. So, got a chance. I think it would be a really great accomplishment for the Fever if they can just get into the postseason, and then whatever happens, happens. But you know how it is in sports. You got to kind of make your way through. You make the playoffs this year, then you go a little farther next year, and then you go, and then hopefully you win a championship at some point.
Yeah, exactly. And I think she's the one that's capable of sustaining the league a little bit longer. I know, there was a lot of talk before about Angel Reese, and rightly so. She's a good player and she's an interesting personality. But let's face it, what city is she in? And they have the number one pick, and he's a quarterback. And when's the last time the Bears had a good quarterback? Crickets. And I'm a Bears fan because they haven't had one. Never. It's not since Sid Luckman. I mean, the last Pro Bowl starting quarterback the Bears had, 1942, and that was when the champion, which they were, played the All Stars from the other team. So, Caleb Williams, they're on Hard Knocks.
I haven't seen it yet. I'll probably binge it. I just have been too, obviously we talked before we started recording. I haven't had time, but I definitely want to check it out. I usually watch it every year.
Yeah. It's the Bears. So
it was the Jets last year.
Yeah.
Hopefully you have better luck than we did.
No, I don't even bring that up. 4 plays into the season, and
I know.
And we're going with Tyson Badgett. No.
Speaking of quarterbacks, Scott.
Good segue.
That's me, Mr. Segue. Obviously was going to be most likely the discussion coming out of Saturday's Kids Day at Kinnick Stadium, and it surely was. For those that want a little bit of peek at what we saw, I have the videos up on my Twitter feed of all 3 quarterbacks, not the whole practice, but a decent amount of footage that'll give you an idea of what it looked like. It did not look good. That's putting it nicely. It would have been nice to just have some glimmer of hope coming out of there. And you can say maybe the inside run was that. I liked how Iowa ran the ball at times, gave me confidence in the interior of the offensive line, made me wonder a little bit about the backups at defensive tackle. But, and that's the thing, right? When we watch Iowa practice, one side is going to succeed and one side is going to fail. Yeah. The defense is usually always ahead. I think it was just the perception we left with, Scott. Everybody still has scars from the last few years, and everybody just wanted to see something good on Saturday, and we just didn't.
I'll say this, because you were on the kind of the sideline shooting video. I was up in the press box with my binoculars, so I was able to see a wider field and everything.
I'm interested to hear your feedback on some of the things I mentioned: interior, defensive line, beyond Yahweh and Aaron Graves. And then the interior of the offensive line, I thought looked pretty good. I'm interested in your thoughts on that, in addition to the quarterbacks.
Yeah. All right. Let's start with everything but quarterback, because the quarterback is going to take us through the limit here. But I liked the running game. I liked a lot of it. I liked the play design, because that's what I really wanted to concentrate on. Obviously the execution matters, but I wanted to see the play design for both run and pass. That's why I was up there, just to see what's Tim Lester trying to accomplish on each and every play. I saw a lot that I liked in the running game, and you always have to take it with a grain of salt. One, still new, only weekend to real practice with all the players, because there's a lot of injuries in the spring. 2, you're going against one of the best defenses, which we talked about earlier in the country. And so they're competitive too. They were doing things defensively. They were not vanilla. They were zone blitzing. They were doing twists and stunts and everything like that. So it was like, hey, we're going to put on a show too.
Yeah, for the uninitiated, the Iowa defense never takes it easy on the Iowa offense. If anything, they crank it up, especially when they're at Kinnick and people are watching. You watch Seth and Phil; they're into it. They want to win.
They want to win. They deserve to win. I mean, they deserve their players to play at their best level. They can't. There's nothing they gain from backing off.
Now, and the offense doesn't gain from that either.
Yeah, right. I mean, although last year they would have, make them feel good about themselves for a little bit. But, and in fact, I was told that at springtime, the Kids Day last year, Kirk told the defense to back off a little bit, and the offense started doing things that they didn't expect, and then that's why they actually looked like, oh, this might work. And of course, I was completely fooled then. This time, yeah, exactly, totally. It was like looking at a candy bar wrapper and thinking, just hit the lottery or something. But I got a goal. I'm like Bugs Bunny here, But I really like the play designs. I'll start with that. I thought the concepts were great. I loved what they were doing in kind of their play action zone read / RPO / just all that kind of stuff. I thought was really cool. And maybe it's because I don't see it. I didn't see it very regularly at Iowa, but I like the concepts. I thought the running game did really well. I thought that it's harder when you're on the field and especially shooting video from a depth to see.
It's hard to see anything inside when you're on the sideline.
But they were getting push. They were getting 3, sometimes 4 yards and stuff like that, which doesn't look like that much if you're looking at it from a depth perception situation. Right. But it's like, okay, you're moving the ball 2nd and 6 instead of, for the last 3 years, 2nd and 11. I liked the blocking. I thought that's what, I thought the entire unit in the run game was crisp and clean, got good push. They got beat, but they're going to get beat. They're going to get beat in games. They got beat by Iowa. That was okay. You live to fight another down. And I liked the concepts in the passing game. I thought that even though they were covered up in a lot of situations, I liked where they were going, the spacing on the field. And again, Iowa's secondary is one of the best in the country. You cannot discount that. You can't say, they weren't getting any separation. Well, guess what? They're going to be playing in the NFL the next couple of years. So all of that I liked. I think they're going to be able to run the ball with effectiveness. I love Kamari Moulton. I think he has.
Was there a play where he came in motion and took a handoff when there was a back behind the quarterback? Do I remember a play? There was one play where
it was Cade Weegan.
Oh, it was Weegan that did it.
Yeah.
It was kind of like it was a jet sweep action with a play action fake to the running back first. It was a nice design. I liked it.
Yeah, it was like a pistol formation and a pop pass or whatever. So there are things that I'm seeing and I'm going, yes, do this. Should have done it last year. Should have done it the year before that. But yes to this now. So I love Kamari Moulton. I think his feet are as good as there is.
How about Xavier Williams? Guy's a fire hydrant.
I know.
My God, his legs were like
it's like Earl Campbell.
Newhouse.
Yeah,
that's another reference.
There it is. Yeah, I was going equally old with Earl Campbell, but
alert, old dude podcast.
Yeah, I know. Robert Newhouse. He most famous for throwing a fullback option pass in the Super Bowl to beat the Broncos, but. Big physical runner. Great. You like that. I liked the way TJ Washington came in late and ran the ball well. Caleb Johnson was probably the MVP of the offense with the way he ran. But Moulton showed me, okay, you could see the weight that he added in his lower half and it was effective. It didn't limit his quickness in the hole. He has explosiveness and he has more power. I think he's going to be a real asset. And I like Jaswan Patterson too. I mean, I was surprised all of them came back, to be honest.
I am too, man. Think about it. It's rare to have this type of stable at one time in this day and age.
Right. Number one is there. LaShawn Williams.
Exactly.
He was on the sideline.
Yeah.
So I feel like this offensive line, this running game will be effective this year. Do you feel like they need to find ways to get, with all the backs we just talked about, maybe getting multiple guys on the field at once, or finding ways to, because they all seem like they're potential, some of them are bigger plays than others, but guys that can make plays with the ball in their hands. Absolutely. And the good thing is, I think with Tim Lester, he'll try to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, well, yeah, I am saying it. In the past, you always questioned whether or not they would do that.
Right.
I remember in 2016 when we kept asking, whether or not you try to get LaShawn Daniels and Akram Wadley on the field together. And then Akram, of course, told us, yeah, I'm on there and we're running this play. And then, and of course, right after that, that's when, he didn't get to talk to us for a few weeks, but so
there are so few of those guys and those instances through the years with Kirk Ferentz that they stick out like sore thumbs when stuff like that happens.
I remember, I don't think it was that year. I think it might've been a little earlier, but Akram got asked, So what did you guys do with your bye week? Well, I went, had some partying and all this stuff. I'm like,
no filter.
Yeah, you can't say that. But I do think though that what this reminds me of is Iowa, had some really good linemen a few years ago. Alaric was great. Tristan, of course, was awesome. Same thing with Tyler Linderbaum. But I have the feeling that this line is going to be more like what we saw in like 16, which won the Joe Moore Award, that really came together. And other than James Daniels, it was kind of a collection of mutts, I mean, low-level recruits, walk-ons, the Boone Myers, Ike Bucker was a tight end, and Cole Croston was a walk-on, and Sean Welsh was, was highly regarded, and, Ross Reynolds and Keegan Render, and, just kind of the collection. I think this unit's a little bit better than that one was. I don't think there's a James Daniels, but I think that there's everything else that they're probably a little better. And I see the chemistry and cohesion. And if the scheme helps them out, because how was
the pass pro Saturday? I saw Herkett get loose a couple times, and Craig and Merriweather, I think, was chasing somebody at one point, but seemed like they were able to get some pressure.
Yeah, they were. And we can go into quarterback too. And I think some of that was quarterback too. Yes. But
yeah, if you want to eventually fold in the quarterback into this offensive line discussion, because it's all connected, right? Yeah. It should be mentioned, Seth Anderson, Dayton Howard, Alec Wick, Lachey was limited. So there were guys that weren't available. Now go ahead.
Yeah. I thought the pass pro was adequate. You're playing again against a good team that's got pass rushers that want to get to the quarterback. And so you got to take that into consideration, that if they were to protect him every single time, then they've got problems on the other side of the ball.
Right.
So you got this yin and yang you got to deal with. I thought that, let's start with the elephant in the room that we've been avoiding for 45 minutes.
I will say this before we go bad. I liked what I saw from Ethan Herkett.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I that gave me more, because we had talked about in this podcast, that was one of our, if there was a concern on defense, is how they're going to generate a pass rush. I came out of Saturday feeling better about
that. I agree. And I agree about Kenny Merriweather. I think he can be a spot guy, and that's what they need. I felt like that's what the edge needed, that they've got four guys that are pretty decent, but they needed one guy that it's third down. Are you quick enough off the ball?
He's quick.
Yeah, and he is. And I felt like, okay, this is a guy that can disrupt in the right way. Joe Evans, surprisingly enough, was that way early in his career. He was a stand-up guy on the edge, pass rush situation. And if they move in Ethan Herkett to inside, or Deontay Craig inside, which they have before, and they bring him out, stand up and rush the quarterback, good. They're in great shape. And I am slightly still concerned about the interior of the backup interiors, because you're going to need them. They seem to be confident in Jeremiah Pittman. We'll see. Jeff Bowie is coming along, doing okay. Will Hubert and let's see the other one, Luke Gaffney. I think those three will get some snaps. Time.
I think we're going to see less of a rotation this year, though, than we have been at tackle, because there's not Aaron Graves and Yahweh Black behind Aaron Graves and Yahweh Black.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't. Pittman might be.
He's got a chance, but he's got to show it.
He might be like Faith Cackety, and you want him to be a little bit better than that. But you need somebody. He's your guy.
Faith was the #1 pick in the CFL draft.
He was.
I'll have you know.
Yeah,
and a hell of a nice guy.
Yes, he was, absolutely. And I won't say what happened afterwards. It didn't last very long in the CFL, but great guy. Great family. I think it's I think they've got three inside there, and I think what they'll end up having to do, and this is where it makes sense, is when you get into pass rush situations, 3rd and 8, you move in a defensive end, and they've done that for years. I mean, Herkett's story and reminds me a lot of Parker Hesse.
Yep.
And and then back in 18, when you look at that pass rush, you had Parker Hesse and Chauncey Golston rushing interior, and then you had AJ Epineza and you had Anthony Nelson rushing from the outside. All four are still in the NFL.
Yep.
Parker's just on the other side of the ball, and
Mm-hmm.
so they're capable of mixing and matching, and then they do a good job of that. So we're kind of, I won't say nitpicking, but we're kind of selectively finding little areas.
Yeah, and I think if you go into the season, I think nothing's perfect. So you're like, okay, this could be something, but maybe it's not. And we all know what Iowa football is about, which is development and getting better as the season goes on. What we saw Saturday, hopefully we see nothing like that on the opener. And then as the season goes on, maybe guys like Jeremiah Pittman and Jeff Bowie and guys like that start to get better and get more comfortable. And that's what you hope for, when it comes October, mid-October through November.
I think if I was to put a perfect defensive tackle, if you could get 8 to 10 snaps a game from Bowie, Gaffney, and Bowie, Gaffney, and who's the other one I messed up?
Hubert,
yeah. I was going to say Herkett, but I'm like, oh, they get tripped up. If you can get about 8 to 10 snaps out of both of them per game, all three of them per game, about 25 to 30 out of Pittman, and if you were able to keep the other two in there for 60 to 70 or whatever they need.
And like you said, there could also be reps where the ends move inside, and you bring in a Merriweather and a Llewellyn. Yeah, on the outside, and then maybe move either Craig or Herkett, one or the other, or both inside. Yeah, Brian Allen. There you have some options on the outside more than the inside right now.
Yeah, you just want, if you're looking at Bowie, Gaffney, or Herbert, you want them to be, go in, say the first series of the second quarter, and they're on their own 15-yard line, and go ahead and eat 5-6 snaps. Yep. And then they get off the, don't get blown off the ball. Just do your job. You don't have to have a statistic. It's kind of like what you see with backups in like basketball. If you get a foul, that's okay. Don't do anything stupid. Just go in there and give everybody a breather.
Don't turn it over.
Don't turn it over. Yeah. And so it's like, don't get a face mask penalty. Yeah. Stuff like that. That's pretty much what that is. But but overall, I mean, I'm pretty confident that this defense is going to be one of the best in the country. And I would say after Ohio State, maybe the best.
I'm bullish on John Nestor after Saturday too.
Yes,
that kid is a playmaker. And I thought TJ Hall looked good before he got hurt his leg. I thought he was holding up well as well. I felt better about cornerback. I felt better about the offensive line at least in running and the interior. Felt a little bit better about pass rush. Some of the stuff we've talked about on this podcast when we were going into Saturday, where, okay, these are what we're going to look at. And then unfortunately, the most important position that we had concern about, we left with more concern than we came with.
Yeah. Let's start with the gong show here. Gong. Where we want to go. We want to go anything. We have, we'll worry about positives in a minute. I saw it firsthand and was, especially with Cade McNamara, and I was really, really, really concerned and just kind of like, not again. Rewatched it again. Rewatched yours, rewatched Hawk Central had. I wanted to make sure that, okay, am I missing something? Am I overreacting? And I'm not. That's the problem. And I made sure in the post-game media, huddle with Kirk to say, is this indicative of what you've been seeing during the camp? I didn't frame it any other way because I just wanted to hear what he had to say. And he's like, yeah, pretty much, which is why, I've been hearing whispers, everybody else probably has too, that, hey, Cade's not doing so well early on. And so you're like, okay. And I got notified that by somebody really close to it on Saturday. And 8 of 24 for 20 yards. And there was a lot to dislike. He was high. He was late. He overthrew guys. He underthrew guys. He was aiming the ball. His fundamentals were really, really bad.
That's the thing that alarmed me. That was the footwork.
Mm-hmm.
And you just said that was surprising to me.
That's what you get a lot of times with a guy who has his front leg that has an ACL.
Yeah.
That do not step and throw very well because they're not as confident in it and they don't want to put it in a position to where it could get hit. So then they kind of they're flat footed when they throw, but then but then they're short or they're long, and it's not a lot of accuracy in that. But he was also that way in drills and in warmups and 7-on-7. It wasn't just unique to because Iowa's defense was out there competing against him. It was consistent, and it sounds like it was consistent throughout the first week of camp. And I'm not sure what this week brings, but it's an obvious concern for me. It's not just maybe he had a bad day against a good defense and it's just one practice because that's the only one I'm going to see. No, it's not the case. This is serious, because all the stuff that we talked about, Rob, about the defense being elite and the offensive line looking better and the running game looking good, that's all great, but you're not trying to get the Outback Bowl, and you need a quarterback to get you to where you want to go. And I think in this case it's and then you look at the second team, which we talked about too. Well, you tell me what you thought about Cade.
I was disappointed. I expected rust, Scott. I didn't expect it as extreme as that for the various things, like you said, ball placement, footwork. I mean, it wasn't just one or two things. It was like a complete disaster. And I remind myself it's one of 20 something practices, and, perspective and context is great. We need all that, but you still have to analyze what you see. And what we saw was not good. And if Kirk comes out after that and says, yes, this is indicative of what we've been seeing, that basically tells us that the whole camp up to what we saw on Saturday, it's looked like shit. Mm-hmm. So what do you do as a coach? So do you split first team reps? Do you, what do you do here? Because the situation, Scott, is you have a guy who's led a team to the college football playoff, coming back from basically not playing for 2 years. A little action here or there, but he didn't look good last year at the beginning of the year against bad competition for the most part. And so that was concerning. So if you're the coaching staff, what do you say? Do you say, it's gonna click for him? Let's just stick with him, and then the rust will knock off, and we'll see the Cade McNamara that was at Michigan in 2022. Or do you say we can't afford to do that? We've got another guy that's got experience in the Big Ten, who's won football games in the Big Ten on our roster, who's healthy and looks better right now. Do you go that way? The bird in the hand type of thing. It's just, to me, it's a complicated situation. And what we talked about before the season, way, way back, but when, Sullivan came in was, we're going to have a quarterback controversy. What happens if Cade struggles at the beginning of the season? We haven't gotten to that point yet, and we're already looking at one.
I think that there's a couple of things in play now that wasn't, say, a year ago and wasn't before Sullivan got here. Let's say Sullivan's not here, then I think you have to be patient, unless you say Marco is capable of starting, which I don't think he is, not this year. So, okay, you throw that out. Now you do have a quarterback who has had some success, limited success in the Big Ten, but he probably fits the system better athletically first. Mm-hmm. He's been here since June, so his exposure to Tim Lester's offense is much more limited than what even Cade McNamara was. Even though he couldn't really perform, but he was with him. He saw video. He went through all the identification. So he's starting at a different level, trying to play catch up. First and foremost, Kirk Ferentz owes it to his football team to play the best player at that position. That goes for any position on the field, and especially at quarterback. Now, there are differences when you're starting to deal with quarterback that you don't have with right guard or Cash or whatever, and we all respect that. We all know that. We're not stupid. But you also have to look at, is he capable of getting better? Do you think he is? And how quickly is it going to be? Are you honest with him? You have to be honest and upfront and say, this isn't good enough. You're going to have to be better, or we're going to have to do something about this. And not necessarily put that pressure on him to, and you want to avoid that, but you also want to be real with him too. At the same time, you have a new offensive coordinator who Kirk has given the keys to the car and decided, I'm going to sit in the back seat. Now I might tap you and say, go on this exit, but otherwise he's not in the front seat, grabbing on the steering wheel like he did before.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll see.
It could change.
This could be the situation for that.
Exactly.
But one thing that I identified with Kirk Ferentz in May when we were in West Des Moines, and they just signed, I think they just signed Sullivan, and he was still, Cade's our guy. Cade's our starter. At Big Ten Media Days, Cade's our starter. Friday and Saturday, he was non-committal on that. He made it look like it was a competition. Now, Cade was with the first team. I think Cade is the front runner, and Cade remains in that position. However, Kirk didn't make it look like it was automatic the way he did in May or July. And then you look over at Brendan Sullivan and his performance. Okay, I'll call it okay. He was like 10 of 21. He had some drops that weren't really his fault. He had a play that was called back that was okay. And then I was really encouraged when I saw his last sequence, which was a 2-minute drill. He was 5 out of 6 passing down the field. When you look at the design, the scheme, the system under Tim Lester, Brendan Sullivan is much more, he's a better fit for that. Is he a better quarterback? I don't know. Is he good? I don't know. I don't want to even go there yet because I don't know. But based on what I saw and what I would do, Rob, is that this week in particular, I'd still have Cade being number one. I have Brendan playing with the first team some. And then I think there's that scrimmage that always happens this Saturday that is really important, more important than Kids Day. And at that point, I would make maybe not the final decision, but I would make a decision as to what the direction of the offense is going to be. And if that means that, hey, we think Brennan might be the better choice here, you got to make it because, again, you owe it to your team. You owe it to your offensive coordinator. Lastly, you do owe it to your fans a little bit, but really you owe it to your team to play the best player that gives them the best chance to win.
On the spot, I'll put you on the spot. Who starts week 1?
Brendan Sullivan.
You think so?
I do.
Okay. How do we get there?
Cade not playing very well.
Okay.
I think that, again.
So is it more Cade not playing well or Brendan actually winning the job? And I know that's semantics, but I mean, I guess I left there Saturday, Scott, saying I'm still not convinced that Iowa has the quarterback thing. And everybody left it.
No.
Are we going into a season again where we're going to have problems?
Maybe. I left there thinking, I don't think that they have an asset at quarterback right now. What I'm kind of mentally going through is, I could look at Cade McNamara and say it's rust if he's, feeling out different things. But when the plays were there to be made, he didn't make them.
What do you think it is? Is it hesitancy from the injury? Have his skill? Have his so what I'm looking for fundamentals eroded during the last, not playing a lot the last 2 years? I'm just wondering what happens to a guy who was pretty good 2 years ago that looked like that on Saturday.
I think overall, Rob, you got to, you start to go back and we can go down the positive path, which we have with Cade. We've given him kind of equity and the benefit of the doubt for so long that now we have to go back and say, where did this may have gone wrong? And you look back at when Michigan won the Big Ten championship game, they had a machine. Yes. They had a machine at running back with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. They had great receivers. They had the best offensive line in the country.
Incredible offensive line.
A fantastic defense. What was the weak link? Was it the quarterback that went through 15 touchdowns and 6 interceptions?
Yeah.
Was he average and the beneficiary of having great players all around him? And he was just the guy that got the trains running on time and he just did it kind of at a decent level. That's fair to suggest. And that's why JJ McCarthy was repping in. And then the next year, kind of looked like they were going to go to McCarthy and then he had a knee issue and he had to have surgery. Well, he's out all that fall from the knee. Then he transfers to Iowa. He's out in spring from knee surgery. He gets back. He gets healthier. He starts to figure things out. Quad injury last year on Kids Day. Had that cloud up his next 5 to 6 weeks. Didn't look good at all in the first 4 weeks, except for the first pass of the season. And then
It's all downhill.
all downhill from there. I was like, I was getting ready to like tweet like, "Oh, Happy learned to putt," and then all of a sudden it's like, no, no, Happy's still playing hockey. Then he has the ACL, and then he's not doing anything for a while. Then he's trying to get back, rehabbing again.
Misses spring again,
new offense. Muscle memory takes time.
Yeah.
Takes timing, but he has been throwing since June.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, some of these things, I think that you start to go, is he really the right guy? Was he just, again, the beneficiary? And I don't fault Kirk at all for going after him to begin with, because I thought that he was the type of quarterback, especially in the older system, that, hey, if he's accurate, if he moves the chains, if he hits some touchdowns, you don't need much, But then you look now at Brendan Sullivan last year, kind of a split starter. He has a conversation with David Braun before the season, and he decides to go. He says, "Hey, I'm keeping this to myself as to what happened here."
Yeah, but for those that don't remember, he went through spring football with Northwestern.
Yeah, and then in an ultimate, and they thought he was going to be the starter. I mean, that's what the perception was, and
they named the transfer, right? Their starter this year. Didn't they get a kid from?
They got Ben Bryant was last year, I think. I can't
remember.
I'll have to look them up because I actually, it's funny you mentioned that because they're the next team that I'm writing about. So, I was getting ready to look them up anyway just to verify who was going to be there. But anyway, he went 2-2 as a starter last year, completed high 60%, looks good in short passes.
Yep.
Can do the RPO, can do the zone read, throw flares, throw slants. In this offense, that's paramount.
Got some giddy up.
He's fast. He can run. I mean, he legitimately is a running quarterback.
Yeah, I was impressed. I didn't know that. I guess I never realized that when he was at Northwestern because I didn't watch a ton of Northwestern. But yeah, very athletic.
So when you kind of size it all up, Cade, is he just, hey, it's really 2 years. He's 24 years old, you go 2 years without really playing at a high level, health-wise, athletically, and you're struggling, have your skills diminished. And then you look conversely at Brendan Sullivan, and he knew the score coming in. He knew that he wasn't going to be the starter, and yet he kept working, and he's learning, and he's been more effective. And I had one person tell me, he said, if over the first 9 practices, or it was like going into Saturday, said Brendan Sullivan has completely outplayed Cade McNamara, and the only one who doesn't see it is Cade. That I was told by somebody who knows. Yeah. And so I think you give Cade the benefit of the doubt as long as you can, but ultimately you have to do what's best for your football team. And if that's Rob, that's beating Iowa State. Mm-hmm. Who gives you the best chance to win? Strip away the names, strip away the numbers. Who gives you the best chance to beat Iowa State? And at this point, it's Brendan Sullivan. And I think if that upsets Cade, well, it does. But you can't worry about that because you wouldn't let egos affect you if you decided that, hey, we're going to start Bo Stevens instead of Nick DeYoung. And Nick's a 6-year guy. Is he going to go run away and, well, I'm going to quit then? No. You just have to do, and you have to tell Cade, be ready to go, and if he doesn't want to do that and be a good team player, then that's something that you got to be prepared for.
Do you give them both playing time in the opener? It's a game you should win. Maybe if you don't have complete clarity and you still have questions about, Cade eventually being able to knock off the rust. That's in your mind. You're like, he can be the guy that we saw. It's just going to take time. I wonder if you just early on, you just pick a guy and go with him, or do you keep it going into the season?
Pick it. I pick it and go with it.
Yeah.
Even if it's Cade, now I would feel differently based on what I saw, that if they went with Cade, I would probably give him a shorter leash. Mm-hmm. Because I would say, you're doing that based on hope, not fact. You're hoping that he gets back to, you think that he can do this and you want him to do this. It's not based on, I saw him do this, because there's no seeing he's done anything worth anything. So it's all on conjecture or speculation. So I give him a short leash. Or if you do it with Brendan, you're saying, yeah, he's the right guy. Let's give him some time. But I don't think you can split reps. I think this is the type. First of all, this isn't the type of team that would respond real well to a controversy like that, especially with two veteran guys who, one's only been here a year and a half, and the other one's been here 2 months. The second thing is, this is a new offense. They've got to build some sort of chemistry and cohesion right away. And you need a quarterback who can't be looking over his shoulder and going, man, I made a bad pass or I made a bad decision. And oh shoot, now I'm coming out. And, I think you just got to let it roll, because the next week's Iowa State, and they're not, this isn't
playtime is over.
Yeah. They're a good team. They're a contender for a playoff spot in the Big 12 title. So yeah, let it roll. What do you think?
The interesting thing that you mentioned that kind of raised my antenna was everybody sees Brendan Sullivan outplaying Cade McNamara, except for Cade McNamara. You know the dynamic of teams, particularly the student athletes. You can't fool them.
No.
They're at practice. They see what's going on. If you play a guy over a guy that's more deserving, that kills your chemistry. That kills confidence that the student athletes have in the coaches. It can be a mess. And we saw a little of that in 2014, with how that was handled. And there were factions of the team that were on one side, the other on the other side. You just mentioned that. I don't know how that is here. Cade's been here for a year and a half. He's bonded with a lot of guys. So are they thinking it's Cade, he'll figure it out and back him? Or are they like, man, we want to get to the playoff. This Sullivan kid is freaking outplaying McNamara. Let's support him. It has the potential to be very divisive.
It does. I think the dynamics of let's say the two most recent controversies, 14 and 08.
Yep.
I think we're we're talking about a controversy that happened 16 years ago, and the other one 10, and it feels like yesterday.
I know.
But the one 10 years ago with Beathard and Rudock, who, by the way, are now both in their 30s. That just is embarrassing for a lot of reasons. But I think with that one, you had two good quarterbacks, and you had Jake, who he was drafted, and CJ was drafted higher than he was, but he was a decent quarterback. I think he had a lot of backing because he kind of fit what Kirk wanted.
Imagine having either one of those guys on this team.
In the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Starting in 20. If they had Jake Rudock in 20, or even they had Nate Stanley in 20, they go to the playoff. They're good. Yep. But anyway, I think with that one, it was just, I saw the trajectory with Beathard and thought, okay, he can get better. I thought Jake was solid. And so it was like the first year, yes, absolutely start Rudock. And then, the trajectory kind of took off a little bit. And so I think
it took Casey saying something in the Tennessean.
Yeah.
To kind of rattle some cages. Maybe the decision's made anyway, but that kind of changed things. And I wonder here, one of the benefits to playing Beathard then was you knew you would have him.
Right.
Going forward. Same thing here kind of with Sullivan.
Yeah.
That another year. So that's something to take into consideration as well.
That's an element. It's something you can't dismiss, because if you're Iowa, you can't bank on, well, if neither one of them work out, we'll just go to the portal again and go grab somebody. It just doesn't work that way. I think this one is more reminiscent in a lot of ways of 08.
I would agree.
Because Cade is a lot like Jake. They actually throw a lot alike, which is sad. I thought that's what
opposite-handed, though.
Yeah, I know. I said he's a right-handed Jake Christensen. I said it on Saturday. Because he's got kind of that same fire that Jake Christensen had. Man's man. He's the swagger guy. Everybody's kind of respecting him, and everybody respected Jake. But I think the team also wanted to win, and if you remember right, Rick was very inconsistent that first year. Was the second year too. He was just really exciting.
Yeah, they bought Christensen in the Iowa State game.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Ricky was so ineffective the week after Pittsburgh.
The week before Pittsburgh.
Was that before?
Yeah, it was game 3. And that was the first start because they blew out Maine and Florida International.
Okay.
Kicked the hell out of them. Then they played Iowa State when the rains came, because the reason why I know that so well is my sump pump was not working right. And
memories.
Yeah. And the flooding of the stadium. And it was like,
yeah, I
didn't sleep that night because I was just so worried about it. But anyway, I digress from my nightmare of 2008. And, that was Rick's first start. They decided to start him, and he was terrible. He was horrible. And I think it was in the third quarter that they brought Jake in, and he presided over the win, let's say. You had a really good run. Yes.
Managed the victory.
It was like 5-3 at one point. They were losing, and then
game was ugly.
Yeah, and then you had Andy Brodell with a great return, and then you had and then, of course, you had Sean Green scoring a touchdown. And then the next week was when they went like first quarter Jake, second quarter Rick.
That's right.
And then the second half, he called it a gut feeling. He went with Jake, even though Rick had outperformed him in the second quarter. But again, the week before was so inconsistent, you just didn't know. And then finally after that, after Jake couldn't do anything, that's when they decided, all right, we're going to go with Rick. And they still lost 2 more in a row. Michigan State, and I'm trying to remember the other one off the top of my head, but I can't.
Yeah,
and, that was back then. But then they started rolling. Then they were it was Northwestern. Yeah, because they're up like 17-3, and then and all that. But bringing up happy memories for people, but but it's got the potential to be that way. Except I think Brennan is a much more consistent player. I don't know. I mean, I think Rick has probably more upside than Brendan does, but I think Brendan, you bring him in, you know what you're gonna get, and that's probably the safe pick at this point too. That he's going to learn the offense. Maybe Cade has a higher ceiling. I don't know, but based on what we've seen,
and can he get there though?
Yeah.
I mean, can you logically say that he can get back to that ceiling?
Yeah, and do you want to risk it?
Yeah,
I wouldn't. I mean, you got to play the best player because, as you said, players know. And if you're playing your son over somebody who should be playing, they immediately know, and they will come. They will transfer away. And stuff like that. And then the same thing with football. If you're playing somebody for a reason beyond who's better, and they haven't built up any kind of equity, because I mean, Cade has done some, has some, but he hasn't done it on the field for them. He hasn't led them to the Big Ten West title. Spencer did. Spencer had equity.
Yeah.
And Spencer wasn't real good, but he was the best option. No question now, looking back.
Yep.
I mean, we would have wanted to see Deuce, the legend of Deuce, out there, or even Alex Padilla, but as we saw, they weren't good enough.
Yeah. I think at this point, if you're an Iowa fan, you just want a quarterback, obviously, that is a step up from what we saw last season. That shouldn't be hard.
Oh.
But you want to get somebody in there. I know people hate this, but it's complementary football, right? You want to have a guy that's not going to fumble the ball when he drops back to pass, that's not going to throw interceptions, that gets the train running on time, right? We like to use that term. But they can also make some plays when they're there, can move the football. We talked about it last week or a few weeks before. You got to be better at just fucking moving the ball, and not counting on the punter to flip the field all the time, although they can be able to do that so much.
Yeah, you're right.
But get some first downs, right? Get a couple first downs in a series, gives your defense some rest. That's complementary football too.
No question. And I think that's ultimately it comes down to making the makeables.
Right.
If the slant is there, throw the slant, make 7 yards. Good job. Hand the ball off effectively. Carry out the play fake. The guy's out open in the flat. You hit him. Don't stand flat-footed and try to throw across your body to a guy who's going to pick it off in the midfield and intercept it and return it for a touchdown.
somebody like Quinn Schulte.
Yeah, exactly. A guy playing a robber role. It's just, that's really where they are. And I'm not trying to talk Brendan Sullivan up like he's something special, because what I think he is probably average. But Iowa hasn't had average since Nate Stanley. I mean, Spencer, love the dude. I think I see big things for him, and I hope he does really well this year at Utah State. I am rooting for him personally. I think he's fantastic, but he struggled. He didn't have good footwork, and he wasn't very accurate, and that was a real issues. And I think if Brendan Sullivan can hit 14 of 21 in a game for 135 yards, a touchdown, no interceptions, and run the ball 6 times for
just the ability to keep the play alive off schedule. I questioned watching Cade move the other day. If you watch the video, there's a couple of plays of him scrambling.
Yeah.
That I have on my Twitter. He labors. I mean, it's going to be tough for him to get away from a Big Ten defense, whereas Sullivan maybe rolls out. You can roll him out. You can move him. He's used to doing those things too in the Northwestern offense. So, yeah, you're winning me over here a little bit. I was more on the side of let this thing play out through camp and into the season. But you're right. I think they need to get as close to Nate Stanley as they can with the how this team is composed, what you have on defense. I thought friggin' Drew Stevens looked like he was, maybe that was just one day, but he looked good as a kicker. So you have that element, right? So you just need a quarterback to not screw things up and make the makeables, as you said. And who's best to do that right now?
Yeah.
It looks like Sullivan.
If you could say, do you have a quarterback who can help you score in every quarter?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's simple. That's like bottom bare bones, but that might be 3 touchdowns and a field goal. That might be 4 touchdowns. That may be 2 and 2 or something like that. You have a defense, you have a special teams unit that's able to fill in all those gaps while you catch up. And you just can't, last year was such a disaster offensively for every reason possible, injuries, what have you. But the worst part of it all was, Rob, that they had no passing game. So the defense said, we're not worried at all. We'll just play man defense on these guys. They don't have a tight end anymore because both of them are out. And then we're going to crowd the line of scrimmage. So then there's no room to run, and the only way they could get something was just basically punching a hole in their face, which is an inside zone. And that's the only thing that worked. And now if you can back them off, if you can play fake, pull it down, throw a slant across the middle, or throw the swing pass to the left or to the right. And then all of a sudden, 5-6 yards, then it's 2nd and 4. And then you have the ability to stay ahead of the chains, not only flip the field, get yourself, score some points, put your defense on the field. They force a punt, you do it again. And before you know it, hey, you're doing well, and you're forcing them to go against your defense, which is your strength. And that's the complementary part of it was, non-existent for the most important element, probably, which is scoring points.
I thought Marco looked a little better the other day than he did in the spring. I think he's making progress. I'm with you. I think he's clearly the number 3 guy right now, but it'll be interesting to see how he develops through the season. You never know. Development is not linear,
No, it isn't.
And something could kick in for him this season too. And they may say, eventually he gets to that point, but it's the quarterback dynamic of, you have Cade, then you have Sullivan, who's back next year. And then you have Marco trying to work his way into playing time. You just wonder how this thing is going to play out in the future, near future, and then after the season future, when you look at the position, because the transfer portal has changed the game.
I almost think you got to look at it before you could look at everything like wide lens for the future. Now you almost have to look at it in like 2-year increments, because so the transfer portal, recruiting, kids coming in today are much more prepared to play right away at quarterback than they were 20 years ago, because they've thrown, they've been in 7-on-7, they've done the camps, they can step right in and compete. So I think in this case, it's like, is our 2-year window Cade and Brendan for 1, or is it Brendan for 2, or is it just get through this year and then we'll figure it out? Or, does Marco or James Reeser, do they figure into the future or not?
Is there time to develop quarterbacks anymore?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to have a developmental guy, then that's fine, but you've got to really look at him and be honest with him and say, we're looking at you to 2 to 3 years. And even then, nothing's guaranteed.
And the mentality of a lot of guys are, I ain't waiting.
Yeah.
If I ain't starting, I'm departing.
Right. Exactly. And what's sad about this whole quarterback development for the longest time is, I got to step back and give props to somebody I never thought I would. Greg Davis was as good as there was as far as bringing in quarterbacks over the last 15 years. He was able to. I mean, I know Beathard was committed, then he committed late or whatever, and that was late in the process, but he was able to get the best out of Beathard.
Yeah. He committed to O'Keefe, because I remember talking to Casey and CJ. I called them after that O'Keefe decided to leave, and they're like, "No, we're going to stick." So I do remember that. But Davis gets credit for the development, no doubt about it.
Nate Stanley, he picked Nate Stanley. And Spencer Petras was speed dating. It was late. They didn't have time to go through all their rigmarole and figure it all out. The rest of them,
it was Petras, Zach Wilson, and there was a third guy, I think, from Texas, and I can't remember his name.
I can't remember the third one. Yeah. But they may have picked the wrong guy. But then I also know about Zach Wilson was not an easy guy to recruit either.
They didn't get a good vibe from him, I don't think, which isn't surprising.
Yeah, they had there was 2 visits that they had set up with him, and he and his mom said, I don't know if we want to go. Then no, we want to go, and they had to cancel. They canceled on him before and everything. So Spencer, as we all know, you meet with him, you see the arm, you're like, okay, this guy's legit. But then after that, what? Padilla, Deuce. Is there? Dare I say that?
Maybe Joey Labus. Maybe he seemed like he would have been good for this system.
Yeah. I am going to be very anxious to see how he competes for Central Michigan. Because if he shows anything, it is a major indictment on Brian, because they wouldn't have played. I mean, they would have been like the movie Hoosiers, Rob. If Deacon would have went down, they wouldn't have had anybody out there. For a while, they would have just said, my team's out there, 10 players.
Wildcat.
Yeah. Or they would have snapped the ball and nobody would have picked it up, because we can't run Wildcat. We can't run Labus out there. I mean, but if he goes there and has
look at the bowl game last year, Scott. I mean, look how long they waited to put Marco in, man. I mean, that was ridiculous.
Yeah. And that to me is, Kirk has a Hall of Fame resume, but that is a blotch to the offense, and the unwillingness to change, whether it was him or Brian or what, they were just so steadfast in keeping it the same. I remember, this is a while ago now, but Mark Stoops lost all of his quarterbacks at Kentucky. So what did he do? He ended up moving Lynn Bowden, I think his name was, for a wide receiver, and they basically ran Wildcat all year. And then he was really good at it. And it's like, you got to do something. I mean, Deacon couldn't pass for anything. Anyway.
Couldn't run either. I mean, there was nothing really.
There was nothing redeemed.
At least Marco got away.
Yeah, right.
From Kentucky when they were pressuring him.
Yeah.
Or not Kentucky, Tennessee.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, even if you would have put Marco in and never threw the ball against Michigan, you would have been better off than what you had. I mean, maybe you only lose, 14-0 or something. Anyway, we can go down that rabbit hole for a long time.
We'll see how this goes, guys, and how We really don't. I don't think we get any.
It looks like next week we might.
Okay, yeah, I know they give us a little bit early practice.
Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay, like we'll get like 20 minutes or something to watch.
I don't know about practice, but Kirk.
Oh, we get Kirk. Okay, well, that'll be interesting too to see what he has to say about things, because he is well aware of what's going on outside the building and what's being discussed and how people feel, and whether or not he's got a controversy on his hands. If you're looking for a coach that's been through pretty much everything, he has. So and that's kind of what I wrote in my column when I said, it's too early to make any declarations on this, but it's up to coaches to put, especially on offense, put the guys in there that give you the best chance to win and put them in the best position for them to succeed, to give you a chance to win. And we've questioned that recently, from Tyrone Tracy to, go down the list of, are you putting guys in the best position to succeed? And are you putting the best guys in there that give you that chance? And that's when you go to quarterback, that's the most crucial decision when making that. And they've got to make the right choice here, Scott.
Yeah, there are seasons depending on it. And when you look at it, I don't want to get so far and make people nervous here.
Yeah.
But when you have a defense like this, and then you look at their roster and what's going to happen next year, offensive line, defense, tight end, you are going to see an exodus. Next year is not the year you say, well, we might be able to get to the playoff this year. It's way too premature to even think about that. I mean, it looks more like a 7-win team than anything else next year. This is the year, though, with the schedule it has, with the defense they have, with the offensive line they have, you got to put your chips in the middle of the table. And can't worry about hurt feelings. You can't worry about, that type of thing. You've got to play the best players, because this is the year you have an opportunity to do something most effective. So I think, so you got a legacy type defining season. Kirk's 69 years old. He's maybe he'll coach another 10 years, who knows, but I doubt it. This may be your last best chance. This may be like Hayden in 96, 97, and you have a good team. You got some good players, got to push your chips to the middle of the table and put yourself in a position to get to the playoff. And that means you're going to be playing a quarterback you hope is good, or a quarterback that you could see that can do what you ask him to do. And maybe it's not great, but it's good enough. And I think that's kind of where they're at right now.
Yep. Favorable schedule. If you guys missed it, and this isn't an absolute, but the top 20 AP top 25 came out this week, and Iowa has one opponent in that top 25, and that's Ohio State, who's, you may have heard, is pretty good.
Yeah.
But there are going to be some good. I mean, we talked about Iowa State is certainly worthy of being ranked. The game at Minnesota, those are, two of the first 4 weeks, they're going to be challenged. And particularly, do you have somebody who can manage your offense? Because I think early in the season, Scott, you're going to have to win mostly with defense and special teams until the offense develops.
Yeah. And that's handing off the ball, making the makeables. Don't do anything stupid. And, they only play one ranked team, but they play 4 teams receiving votes.
Right.
But all 4 are home. All 4 of them are, Iowa State, who is the highest of the bunch. Then I don't care, remember the order, but Wisconsin, Washington, and Nebraska. They're all in Iowa City. Those are teams that if you play poorly, you're capable of losing those games.
Well, if Nebraska 2 years ago.
Yeah. Nebraska last year.
There were circumstances, but they lost.
Yeah. Nebraska last year. I mean, every year with Nebraska, it's pretty much a close game anymore. Iowa State, it's a close game every year. He lost 2 years ago. Same deal. He had a fumble at the goal line because he handed the ball off to a fullback in the rain who hadn't had a carry yet. And he had a wide receiver who was betting on sports who fell down. But anyway, but it really comes down to there were a lot of plays that could have been made in that game that weren't, and in any of those games. And you just need to make them because they're going to be close games.
Fascinating, right? Mm-hmm. This is a litmus test. Kirk says he's letting Lester run with this thing. Is he? We're going to find out here over the next several weeks how this plays out. because it's against every fiber of Kirk's being to not give Cade a chance to be the starter in week 1.
Yeah.
That. Just think about what the history here, how out of character that will be for him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why this is fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well, he's had good quarterbacks though too. I mean, Spencer was different because they didn't have a good backup.
Right.
That would have been a real dynamic. I think that might have went the other way too. But Nate was a good quarterback, 68 career touchdown passes. CJ obviously was a good quarterback, still in the NFL. Jake, that was tough. He was in the NFL for a little while. James Vandenberg, that was the second year was tough because he didn't handle Greg's offense very well.
That was a train wreck.
Yeah. And then Rick was a decent quarterback. And, and then you had kind of the sandwich there with Jake, who wasn't as good, and Drew Tate, who was. So,
yeah.
And then you're going back far.
Even that 2003 team, Scott, when Nathan Chandler was the quarterback, that's a good example of what they could use this year. Not the same. I mean, Nate was 6'7" or whatever.
Yeah.
Just an odd, physically different than all the quarterbacks Iowa's had. Most quarterbacks Iowa's had. Yeah. But he just kind of managed things there. And that was a really good defense. They had a good running game with Fred Russell. They had a pretty good offensive line. Gallery's still there. They leaned on what was the strength of that team. And Nate was really good at just doing what they needed to do. And that's kind of what they need this year.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. It was weird. I kind of wanted to use that example, but then I knew that their body types are so different that I didn't want to, I wanted to equate the performance rather than the player. And right. There's nothing wrong with being a game manager if you're having success. And once in a while, make a big play or two and win games.
It's funny. 2 of the wins at Iowa State, the one where they won with Beathard with the long running play. And then that 2003 game where Nate beat him with his legs. He had a couple of nice runs in that game. Because if you remember, that was the year after they lost that heartbreaker at home to Iowa State. And they had lost, what would that have been? They lost 98, 99, 1, 2, 4 in a row, I think, to Iowa State at that point, going into 03, 5 in a row.
Yeah.
And they went into Ames, and people were down on Iowa, and Nate did a good job, just getting them to victory in that game.
It was funny. I can't remember if it was 03 or 04, and I was in Missouri at the time, but I was getting ready to go cover the Chiefs. I think it might have been 04, so I may be off by a year. But I ran into Lynn Stiles, who actually worked at Iowa back with Evie or Jerry Burns or something. But he was like the director of pro personnel with the Chiefs, and we were in the airport, and I was getting ready to fly to the Chiefs game, and I'm like, where are you going? And he's like, I'm going to go see Iowa State. They got some players, so I want to check them out. It might have been 04 now that I think about it, but anyway, I think I was flying to Denver, so yeah, it was just kind of that spawned on me with the Iowa State thing from that era, because I know that there was one that I missed, just watching and stuff.
Yeah. So I guess the bottom line or the moral of the story is there's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different body types. You just need better quarterback play, obviously, from last year, and it has to be good enough. And it was not on Saturday at Kids Day. What we saw on Kids Day is not getting you to the college football playoff. And the coaches see that, and Kirk said that was indicative of what had happened to camp. You hope with a veteran coaching staff, pretty veteran team, like we talked about, guys that see what's going on, that the right decisions are made here.
A lot of guys coming back for their 6th year, Rob. Yeah. A lot of guys came back who had offers to go to other places for a lot of money that chose to come back here. You have an offensive coordinator who picked Iowa, who wants success because who knows what his future holds. Mm-hmm. He is held to this. If Iowa ranks 114th, and they have a bad passing game again, it reflects on him. It does. People are people going to hire him because, well, yeah, but it was just Iowa? No, they're not gonna. He's got to prove it. He wants to prove it. He's a competitor, and Kirk's a competitor too. So I think the step in the right direction was what Kirk said Friday and then definitely Saturday afterwards, which was he was honest. I mean, he's not going to reveal everything. We know that. But he was honest in that's indicative of what we see in the camp and non-committal when it came to where it stands as far as who's starting. I think that's the fairest thing he could do. There's still more camp. There's still an opportunity for Cade. They still want to believe, but you gotta
Live
see
in reality.
you can't have what you've had the last few years.
Yep.
Otherwise, you might as well have Brian back again.
No doubt. And nobody wants that. No offense to Brian as a person or anything like that. It just did not work, as we all know. And it was time to move the page, turn the page. We've done that. And now you have to hold on your butts for a few more weeks here as we wait to see how this all plays out. But intrigue is good, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Sure. We'll go with that.
Yeah, there you go. What a way to end on intrigue.
All right, guys. We'll be back to talk some more next week. Hopefully, by the time we talk to you, we will have talked to Kirk. It sounds like we will. So maybe we'll have a little bit more insight into how the coaches view this and where things stand at that point as we get a week closer to the season. So be sure to tune back in next Thursday morning. We'll be here around 9:00, and we'll talk to you then. Thank you to our sponsors. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and we will talk to you next week. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.